Good morning, everybody. Welcome to City North Church. I'm so glad that you all have joined us today for part one, the first part of a brand new 5-part series that we are calling From This Day Forward. If you have your message notes and you want to grab those real quick, we'll get started right away. Now, I want to let you know right up front, just in full transparency, a lot of the big ideas and kind of the overarching concepts in this series are taken directly from a book called From This Day Forward by a pastor named Craig Groeschel. He's an amazing pastor, an amazing writer. He pastors what most people think is probably the largest church in the country, roughly 90 to 100,000 people, so no big deal. But he is an incredible pastor and writer. And I tell you that because if throughout this series it kind of piques your interest, like our goal every week is that our messages would be very helpful to you. And if this is a series that as we're going through it, you find it helpful, but you want to dig in a little bit deeper, I would encourage you to pick up a copy of that book, again, called From This Day Forward by Pastor Craig Groeschel. It's available on Amazon and wherever else, and he's not paying me to say that, although I wish he was. But it's an awesome book. I would really encourage you guys to check that out. So, that said, we have one big, simple goal in this series, and that's this. If you're single, we want to invest in you and give you the tools that you need to set you up to have a successful marriage one day. If you're married, we want to give you basically 5 commitments that you can make to fail-proof your marriage to ensure that you have a great marriage. So, as we dive into that, I want to get a little bit of participation, and I know sometimes people don't participate, so I need you to loosen up for a second. I need your participation. Your participation's easy today. It's a hand raise, okay? So, ladies, how many of you had your entire wedding planned at 5? Like, seriously, were you one of those? Yeah, there's a couple, okay? Like you had your children named before you even had your first boyfriend, right? Like, this was my experience. When Vanessa and I got engaged and started talking about the wedding, she starts asking me questions, and I'm like, this is a part, like, I don't. She's like, oh yeah, I've had this plan since I was like 6. Don't ask me questions, just do it. I'll show up and it'll be great. Guys, how many of you had your wedding planned before you were 6? Nobody? That's good, because if you did, I was gonna tell you to leave, that you're not welcome here, because that's weird. Don't do that. Now, how many of you are still dreaming? Like, there's a weird tension when it comes to marriage. And that tension is this, that all of us go into marriage with expectations. And whether you're married now or preparing for marriage, you have an image in your mind of what marriage is supposed to be. The problem is that for a lot of people, their expectations go unmet. So the issue is that what happens when we have expectations that go unmet is that we end up with disappointment and with hurt, sometimes with anger. And what will tend to happen over time is if those issues don't get resolved, if they don't get better, then people end up asking this big question, which is kind of the big question we're going through in this whole series, and that's is a great marriage even possible? In my experience working for the last 8 years with teenagers, and then also adults, but primarily teenagers, I've realized more and more, most young people don't think a great marriage is possible. Most don't. Like, most people think that a marriage is doomed to end in one of 2 ways. Either divorce, which statistics say 50% of marriages roughly end in divorce. Or maybe even worse, a lot of younger people think, well, even if a marriage survives, the 2 people just end up miserable anyway. Like they're not happy. They're just surviving, like they're just staying together for their kids, or they're just staying together for, because it's like the right thing to do, but they're miserable. And so if you look at marriage statistics, it's actually interesting because the younger you are right now, the statistics are saying the more likely your marriage is to survive, but less young people are actually getting married because they see it as an unnecessary risk. And so there's just this weird tension when it comes to marriage. So is a great marriage even possible? I want to submit to you today and throughout this series that the answer to that question unequivocally is yes, it is. A great marriage is absolutely possible, but it's not probable unless we look at doing marriage a different way. Because the way culture teaches us about marriage and about relationships, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So I mentioned earlier that according to statistics, about 50% of people get divorced. And there's this kind of idea amongst younger people. I've heard friends talk about this who say things, like, well, with 50% odds, why would I get married? Like, what else would you do with 50% odds, right? If you knew that there was a 50% chance you were going to contract cancer by eating the breakfast cereal you eat every morning, you would probably not eat that breakfast cereal. You would probably pick a different cereal. Or if you knew that there was a 50% chance that tomorrow all of the money that you had invested was going to disappear because your bank was going to fold, you would probably not leave your money in that bank. Or if you knew there was a 50% chance that you were going to leave here today and get into a car accident on the road you drive every time you come, you would probably find an alternate route, right? Like those are not good odds. And so the question for us and what we really want to do in this series is help improve your odds. We want to improve your odds. We want to take that 50-50 chance and make it, a 95-5 chance or a 99-1 chance. And we believe that there are steps we can take to fail-proof existing marriages. And also, listen, for those of you who are not yet married, you're hearing me talk about a lot about marriage and you might be checking out a little. Don't. Because if you'll do the things we talk about in this series now, your behavior today form your habits for tomorrow. And so if you'll do the things we talk about in this series now, they'll fail-proof your marriage before it ever even starts. So I'm excited about this because this is absolutely huge. So over the next 5 weeks, we're going to walk through 5 commitments we can make. And these are all directly from Pastor Craig's book. And what I'm going to do is today I'm going to give you kind of the overview right up front, which I don't usually do, but I'll tell you why in a minute. So these are the 5 commitments that we're going to make together over the next 5 weeks. The first thing today, we're going to talk about that we need to commit to seek God. Seek God. It's the first commitment we've got to make if we're ever going to have great marriages and great relationships. We got to seek God. The second commitment we're going to make together is we're going to commit to fight fair. We're going to commit to fight fair. The third commitment we're going to make is that we're going to commit to have fun. To have fun. Now, I'm going to give a quick disclaimer here. That week is the romance week. So if you have children, you'll want to make sure to take advantage of our fantastic City North Kids department because it could get a little steamy. So I know all the men probably are just like, wait, what was that date now? Like, guys, I'm going to help you out a little bit. It's going to be a good week, but it is the romance week. So take advantage of our kids department. It will be PG-13. Okay? Just heads up. The fourth week, we're going to talk about that we need to commit to stay pure. We've got to commit to stay pure. And then the fifth commitment we're going to make is that we're going to commit to never give up. Those are the 5 commitments we're going to make. And I genuinely believe that if you'll walk with me over these next 5 weeks, and if you'll make these commitments alongside me, it's going to change your current marriage forever, and it's also going to change the potential of your future marriage for those of you who are not married just yet. So that's where we're headed. And I tell you that up front for 2 reasons. First, and this is going to be a heavy statement, okay? So I'm just going to clarify that up front. For some of you, you might be in a spot right now where you don't know how you're going to make it tomorrow. And I want you to know there's light at the end of the tunnel. Like there's hope. We're going somewhere with this and it can change your marriage. So if you're in a spot where you're legitimately like you're at the end of your rope and maybe nobody even knows that, stick with me. Stick with me and we'll be all right. The other reason I tell you that up front is because all of us, I am positive, all of us know some people who are struggling. Like we know some people who are struggling in their relationships and in their marriages because marriage is hard. Invite them. Invite them. Like just bring them with you one week. We've got invite cards out at the Next Steps booth in the Commons. As you exit today, the Next Steps booth will be right in front of you. There's a whole bunch of invite cards right there. Just take some invite cards and invite your friends. The worst thing that can happen is they say, no, thank you. The best thing that could happen is they could show up and their life could be completely different forever and their eternity could be changed. And I don't say that like tongue in cheek. I mean that. The worst thing that happens is they tell you no. The best thing that happens is they come and their life's never the same. So invite your friends. If you know some people who are struggling in their marriage, who need some help, invite your friends. So let's jump back to our big question. Is a great marriage even possible? Yes, a great marriage is possible, but I said earlier, it's not probable. And it's not probable because there's a big problem in the way that our world talks about marriage and talks about relationships. But I think the biggest problem is in the way they talk about preparation for marriage. And what I mean is this, for most people, they go through their life pre-spouse, pursuing and looking for the one, right? And this has gotten me in trouble with my wife over time, but she's not in here today. So you end up with these shows on TV, right? Like The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, and some of you are like, yeah, I love those. And that's great. I don't love those. You end up with movies like The Notebook and different, romantic, any kind of romantic movie. The plot line is always the same. There's a person who is searching for the one, who is searching for someone to complete them, someone to make them whole, someone to make them happy. So like there's a piece of me missing, and now I need to pursue and find the one person who is on this earth, the one person who will complete me and make me whole. And that's a faulty way of looking at it. Now, it's true that we do need to find the one who brings us wholeness and completeness. The problem is that culture has that switched up. And so what I would submit to you today is this, that if you want to have a healthy marriage, the first place you need to start is you need to know that God is your one and your spouse is your two. God is your one and your spouse is your two. Now, I'm going to teach this relentlessly here. Like we do relationship messages constantly here because relationships are really hard. And we're going to teach this principle relentlessly because it is absolutely foundational to you having any kind of healthy relationships. You have to know that God is your one. Jesus shows us this principle when he's asked by kind of the religious leaders in his time, what's the greatest commandment? Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind, like everything you are. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor. So first love God, then love the people around you. God is your one and your spouse is your two. Now there's two different applications for this, depending on if you are not yet married or if you are already married. So for single people, I want to give you the first application. So how do you seek, or how do you place God as your one and your spouse, your future spouse as your two? What you need to do is you need to seek the one while preparing for your two. You need to commit to saying, I will seek the one while preparing for my two. So when we're not married, like we're going to just pursue God with everything we are. We're going to put let me say it this way to you. You need to put all the energy that you previously have put into pursuing a spouse into pursuing God. You need to put all the energy into pursuing a person. You need to switch that and pursue God. Now there's a verse in Matthew where Jesus is teaching and he says this. He says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and everything else is going to be added to you. Now, this doesn't mean that life always works itself out exactly how you want, but what it does mean is that God changes your heart and changes what you feel like you need on the inside to be satisfied. Because God fills you and makes you satisfied, he completes you, and then you're able to actually look for the right person without desperation. So if you hope to have a godly marriage one day, you need to understand that you need to live a godly life today. If you want to have a godly marriage one day, you need to live a godly life today. And if you'll do that, what'll happen is really interesting. You'll actually become the person who you hope to marry. And if you become the person you hope to marry, then you'll attract the kind of person that you want to marry. So you need to be careful about this. The habits you form today, or the behaviors you have today, the choices you make today form your habits for tomorrow. So whatever you want your future marriage to look like, do that now. Seek the one while you're preparing for your two. Now, all right, for those of you who are married, how do you apply that truth that God is your one and your spouse is your two? The way we apply that is that we say, I will seek the one with my two. I will seek the one with my two. So our marriages can never be what God wants unless he is the one and our spouse is the two. Now, I keep hammering this home because it's huge. Our marriages can never be what we want them to be or what God wants them to be unless God is our one and our spouse is our two. But the problem is it's really easy to get that order all screwed up. It's really simple to get those orders messed up. Either replacing God with your spouse or even replacing God with your kids or your job or your money or any number of different things. It's also easy to replace your spouse as your number two. Again, with job, money, all kinds of, it's just easy to let this order get messed up. But you'll never have a great marriage unless this is the order. Because here's what happens when the order gets messed up. We begin to idolize things that we were never meant to idolize. Now, all that means, the word idolize might freak some people out. All that means, I looked it up in Webster's, and the definition of idolize is to love or admire to excess. In other words, to love or admire something more than it deserves to be. And so what happens is we have God as our one, we have our spouse as our two, and then if the order gets mixed up and we put anything else as our number one, that means we're admiring or loving to excess. We're idolizing that thing. The problem is that anything you idolize, you eventually demonize. Anything you idolize, you eventually demonize. So this is how it plays itself out in marriage. If you replace God as number one with your spouse, here's the way this plays out. You spend all your time and energy pursuing this person, trying to find the one. You put all your hopes and dreams in them, and then you get married. And then you've idolized that person. You've set them up to where they're the ones who fulfill you. And then what happens is down the road, you demonize them, and it looks like this. So for men, maybe you were in a position where you met your wife a long time ago, and you were like, you might have said things to your friends like, man, she's just amazing. Like, she's so driven, and she's so like particular, and just everything's in order. Like, it's amazing. And then 20 years later, you're going, man, she's a control freak. Like, she don't let me do anything. I gotta ask permission for everything. She's nagging me all the time. Like, same person, idolize, demonize. Women, a lot of times it goes a different way. A lot of times I've heard girls say things like, oh, he's so laid back. And he's just so easygoing. And then 20 years later, he's a lump on a log. He doesn't do anything. He won't even pick up his laundry, right? Same person, idolize, demonize. Anytime you admire or love someone to excess, you idolize them. And if the orders are wrong, you'll eventually demonize them. So the reason that this matters, if you say, I will seek the one with my two, it can keep the priorities right. In the book of Malachi, the prophet Malachi writes this. He says, did he not make them, meaning married people, give you some context, did God not make couples, married people, did he not make them one with a portion of the Spirit in their union? See, it's hard to get the order wrong when you're actually one flesh, because the Bible says that when you get married, God makes you one flesh. It's hard to get the order wrong when you're one flesh seeking God together, because that keeps God at the top. And if you're one flesh seeking God together, that keeps your spouse second. It keeps the order right. So you need to commit to saying, I will seek the one with my two. All right, so we need to seek God. Like, we've got to be people who commit to seeking God with our whole lives. And so what I want to do for the last little bit here is just get really practical and help you, like what does that look like? How do I seek the one? How do I seek the one? What does that actually look like in a day-to-day life, in day-to-day life? And just right off the bat, you need to know there is no scientific method. This is a relationship. There is no scientific method. There is no formula. But there are some habits and some practices and some behaviors. I'm going to give you 3 of them today that if you'll do them, they will help. They will significantly change your marriage. And before I do that, quickly, I want to give you an encouragement and a challenge. Straight from the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah writes this. It's God speaking to his people. And he says this. He says, you will seek me and find me. So there's the encouragement. The encouragement is, it's accessible. Like, God is accessible to you. Like, you might be sitting there saying, I've tried seeking God in my life, and it's never worked. It's never worked. It can happen. You need to know today, if you seek God, you will find him. The challenge is the second half of the verse. When you seek me with all your heart. You can't do it halfway. You can't go half in. You can't have one foot in and one foot out and go, well, we'll just kind of try this and see what happens. It's all or nothing. If you pursue God, if you seek God with all your heart, you will find him, and he will do incredible things in your life. So that's the encouragement and the challenge. The first thing, the first behavior, the first habit, the first practice you need to put into place in your life and in your marriage to seek God is this. You need to pray together. Pray together. In 2 Chronicles, it says this, God speaking. He says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sin, and I'm going to apply the principle here, not the direct context, and I will heal their marriage. I will heal them. Like, God wants to do a healing work in your life, but it takes humbling ourselves and praying. You need to seek the one with your two. You need to pray together. Now, for some of you, immediately you kind of freak out about that because you're like, wait a minute. I don't pray in front of people. Like, that's awkward. That sounds weird. So my job today is not just to come out here and to say, you guys need to pray together, because I know that that's not helpful to you. My job is to help you figure out what this looks like and how you can do it. Because probably, I'm gonna do some generalizations, but probably a lot of the men are like, you want me to what? And the women are probably like, yay, he's telling us to pray together, right? Listen, I'm just gonna be upfront and honest with you. Vanessa and I don't pray together like you might think when I say pray together. We don't. We've tried it. It was terrible. It just didn't work. Like, we tried it and it was awkward, and she was always like, you're a pastor, I don't know what to say. And I was like, well, what's that even mean? Like, it didn't work. We tried it a lot, it didn't work, okay? So, how do you pray together? That doesn't necessarily mean that you spend like personal time in prayer together. There are couples that do that, but it's not for everyone. But all throughout the day, we're trying to pray for each other. So what this looks like for us is like, I know what's on Vanessa's heart. I know what's on her mind. I know the things that she is going to God with, and I'm going to God with those things as well and petitioning God on her behalf. Like, I'm going to God and praying for the things that I know she's praying for and petitioning him. And then I'm just letting her know, like, hey, I've been praying for you. Like, how's this going? How's that going? And so we're not always praying together, but we're always praying together. Does that make sense? So if you know your spouse and you know what's on their heart, like, petition God on their behalf. Just cover them in prayer. Make sure it's not just them praying for themselves, but there's somebody else covering them in prayer as well. Now, again, I know, listen, I come from a church background where, I was in church my whole life, but prayer has always been hard for me. And I've joked about this before, but I just kind of, again, I want to let you guys off the hook a little bit, because I know for a lot of people, when we start talking about prayer, people freak out about it. I have always struggled with prayer. I'm gonna be real with you as your pastor. I struggle with prayer. We do, and as a part of our growth track, we do a spiritual gifts test, because we believe God has gifted everyone uniquely. And there are certain ways you're gifted that I'm not. Of your pastor's spiritual gifts, prayer is one of my worst. Like, I'm not good at it. I struggle with it. There are some people who, when they pray, like, it's really eloquent and it just comes second nature, and like, they can spend hours in prayer and it's nothing. Like, man, if I spend 5 minutes in prayer, it's a good day. Like, because I'm seeing shiny objects and like there's noises distract. Like, I just struggle. And so if you struggle, I first of all just want to let you off the hook and say, I'm with you. Like, I'm really with you. It's not easy, but I'm committed to giving you tools that can help you develop your prayer life. And so if you struggle with prayer, if you're kind of freaking out going, man, I don't even know where to start with that, let me encourage you. Out at the Next Steps table in the Commons, we have some prayer guides. I actually meant to grab one and I forgot to. But we have these little booklets that right on the front say pray first. And all it is a little prayer guide. Those are yours. Like, you've bought them. Like, they're yours. Take them. You take one for your car, one for your house. I don't care. Take them. Take as many as you want. Those prayer guides are fantastic because they give you a way to pray. Like, you don't just have to sit down and go, God, thanks for today and the cold. And because that's how prayer is sometimes, right? Like, you don't know what to say. You don't know where to go. Grab a prayer guide, take it home with you, and work through one of the prayers in there. There's 4 or 5 different types of prayers that you can walk through. It'll help you. Grab a prayer guide. That's your first step. If you don't know how to pray together, grab a prayer guide and start praying. Like, every day, just start praying. And as you pray, just begin to work your spouse into it. And then as you do, maybe like send them a text message. Like, that's all it has to be. Just, hey, I'm praying for you today. That's it. Start there. And when that gets comfortable, then maybe take it another step further. When that gets comfortable, take it another step further. Just start small. It doesn't have to be huge. But you have to pray together. The second thing that you've got to do to fail-proof your marriage and to seek God together is that you have to discuss the Bible together. You've got to discuss the Bible together. Again, people might start freaking out, like, this is weird. Listen, again, I'm gonna let you off the hook. Vanessa and I we don't sit down and do family devotions. We tried those too. It was also terrible. It just didn't work for us. And I don't know why. There's some couples it works for. It didn't work for us. So I'm not telling you that you need to get up every morning and read the Bible, and huddle together as a husband and a wife and read the Bible and talk about it and pray, because you might hear that and go, that's weird. I'm not doing that. You don't have to. What we do is we're committed to getting the Bible into our families' lives every day. And so this is the principle. We apply a principle from Deuteronomy chapter 6. And this is what it says. It says, these commands that I give you, I being God, give you today are to be upon your hearts. Like they're supposed to be in you. Not just a book, they're supposed to be in you. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. In other words, just make talking about the principles and ideas that you're learning, just like talk about them. Like just talk about them. Just make them a part of what you talk about as your family. And so when I'm disciplining my children, which is mostly all the time because they're just like me and they need a lot of a stern talking to. When I'm disciplining my kids, like when I'm talking to Brooklyn and talking to her about, how she's behaving one way, I don't just try to give her life principles, I try to give her biblical principles. Vanessa and I, one of the easiest ways that we do this is we'll talk about the Sunday message sometimes. Because for me, I spend a week preparing it, but Vanessa, she's never heard it until Sunday. Or when she's not in here, she'll listen to it during the week. And so we'll just talk about like, hey, did you think that was a good point? Like, how's that played out in your life? Like just practical, simple. Doesn't mean you have to sit down and study the Bible together. But as you're growing and as God is revealing things to you and changing you, just talk about it. Just talk about it. Make it a habit to talk about that stuff. The third thing that you need to do to seek God together is that you need to join a small group together. You need to join or participate in a small group together. You're probably thinking, here goes the pastor telling me I've got to do more church stuff, because that's what pastors do. They're always like, come to church more and give your money and just come to church, be at church all the time. Full disclosure, yeah, I'm asking you to participate more in something for the church. But I'm not asking you to do that for the reasons that you might think. You see, I want something for you. I don't want something from you. Listen, there's a lot of things I could have done with my life. There's a lot of things that I could have chosen to do with my life. God called me here to plant a church because I am so passionate about seeing people experience life, experience fullness, experience joy. Like life doesn't have to stink. And I feel like so many people, especially Christians, it's the craziest thing. So many people just accept this like, well, life just kind of stinks and it's just the way it is. Like I just survive every day. Like, no, Jesus said that he came to give us life and life to the full. And I am so passionate about helping every single one of you experience and discover what life to the full looks like. But you can't have that alone. It's not possible. It's absolutely not possible. You need people around you who love you and who pray for you and who walk with you. I don't want you in a small group so that I can count attendance. I have lots of church planting friends and pastor friends around. Like, listen, if I'm just gonna be really honest with you, we're still a very small church because we just launched. Like, if we have 30 people in our small group semester this semester, I'm gonna be pumped about it. I've got friends who have 3,000 people in small groups. Like, you coming to a small group isn't pumping up my ego any, because I've got buddies who are just killing it. I don't want you in a small group so I can go, well, we had 30 this week. I want you in a small group because I want you to experience life, to experience freedom, to experience what it's like to be walking with people who love you, who you can take the mask off and they don't care who you really are, but they'll walk with you and encourage you and push you along in your faith. You need people around you who love you and who pray for you and who walk with you. And listen, for you married couples, your marriage needs it too. Your marriage needs it too. If you'll give me 13 weeks, that's our group semesters are 13 weeks long, because I know if I get up here and say, we want you to give us a year, you're not giving it. You're not, I get that. 13 weeks. If you'll give us 13 weeks and do it with all your heart, and just dive in. And if your life isn't better and if your marriage isn't better at the end of those 13 weeks after you gave it your all, I'll never ask you. We'll just get rid of small groups. Like, I mean that because I know this works. And I know it works for two reasons. One, because over and over in the Bible, it shows this concept. But even more significantly than that, I know this works because it worked for me. See, a lot of you don't know that 2.5 years ago, my marriage was basically over. And there were a lot of things that led us to that point. There were a lot of things that happened. But if I'm being completely honest, like heart bared before you guys, the only reason that my wife and I stayed together is that we had a daughter. That was it. Like outside of our daughter, we were done. She was young. She was about 6 months old at the time. And we had been through a level of hell as a couple. And if we had not had our little girl, and if we were not committed to saying I know as a youth pastor, I knew the statistics on what happens to kids who come from broken homes. Like I know the stats. I know the realities that happen. I know the challenges. I mean, we were this close. And it was through a small group with a couple of other couples who we admired and who we looked to and who truly loved us. Like Vanessa could go to their house and she could yell and scream about how much she legitimately at that point in our marriage hated me. And I could go and I could talk with him about how I hated her. And they loved us and they restored us back to health. Like it happened in our lives. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it says this. It says, and one standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Notice what he says next. 3 is even better because a cord of 3 strands, or a triple braided cord is not easily broken. Do you want to see your marriage get better? Do you want to see your relationship get stronger? You need some other people with you. Because the more people that surround you that really love you, who you can take the mask off and be real and will walk with you and pray with you, the more people who are around you, the more strength you have. If you try to go it alone, you will not make it. Like if you're at the end of your rope in your marriage or your relationship, you need to know if you go it alone, you won't survive. You might stay in it, but you'll end up miserable and you'll just be in it for all the wrong reasons. So let's bring it all home. The first step in having great relationships and great marriages is that you have to seek God. You have to seek God, and that starts by having your priorities right. God is your 1 and your spouse is your 2. If you're single, you need to pursue the 1 while seeking the 2. Sorry, I said that wrong. If you're single, you need to seek the 1 while preparing for your 2. And if you're married, you need to seek the 1 with your 2. And then once your priorities are right, you need to seek God 3 ways. You need to pray together, discuss the Bible together. You need to get into a small group together. And if you'll commit to those 3 things from this day forward, like, look, we serve a from this day forward kind of a God. The most incredible thing about our God is that he doesn't look at our past and hold it against us. When we come to him, when we kneel before him and we lay ourselves before him, he says, you know what, your past, it's gone, it's erased. From this day forward, we're gonna do things different. We serve a from this day forward kind of a God, and you can have a from this day forward kind of a marriage if you'll start this today. So I want to say it one more way as we wrap up, and this lays the foundation for everything else. So if I could sum this entire message up in one phrase, it would be this. The number 1 essential of healthy relationships is a God-first life. A God-first life. Like orient your life around God. Like trust the systems that God designed. Pray together, discuss the Bible together. Get into a small group. It can change your life forever. If you bow your heads with me. Nobody looking around, nobody moving around. This is an important time where hopefully some people are making important decisions. Because more than likely, there's some of you listening right now who you're just in kind of a desperate place. You don't know where to go. You don't know what to do. You don't see light at the end of the tunnel. And we all want better relationships and better marriages, but it all begins with a life-changing and life-giving relationship with Jesus Christ. So for some of you today, your relationship with God just isn't where it should be. Like there's a weight on your life because you know God's not first. Maybe at some point he was. Maybe he's still on your list, but he's just not in the top spot. That's really what salvation is. It's when you give God the first spot in your life. And you can do that right there in your seat today. And if you'll do it, and if you'll begin to pursue him, if you'll begin to seek him, if you'll begin to actually actively go after him, he will change your life forever. And so today, if you sit there and you go, you know, Andrew, I hear this and I know that God's not first in my life. He's not. Like he's on my list, but he's not first. He's obviously on your list or you wouldn't be here today. But if you would sit there today and say, God is not first in my life. He is not first on my list. Here in a moment, I'm just gonna ask you very simply to take a step of faith and to boldly raise your hand. We're not gonna make you stand up or make you come to the front or embarrass you in any way. But if that's you and you know you need to make a change in your life today, that you need to put God first, Would you right now in this moment just boldly raise your hand and say, that's me, count me in on that. I want God first. He's not first, but he needs to be. Would you raise your hand? Awesome, great. Put your hand down. That's fantastic. Best decision you'll ever make. Best decision you'll ever make. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say a prayer, and if you raised your hand, I just want you to repeat this prayer with me. It's a simple prayer of faith. There are no magic words. If you didn't raise your hand, but you know that's you, listen, you can still say the prayer. Raising your hand doesn't do anything. But a simple prayer, a confession of faith in Jesus, and a reorientation of your heart does. So will you pray with me this morning? If that's you, just say, God, today I know that I need you to be first in my life. God, right now my priorities are out of order. You're not my one. And God, today I want you to be my one. God, I want you to take the top spot. God, I want to seek you above all else. I want to live a God first life. God, today would you give me the strength to pursue you? Would you surround me with people to help me? God, would you change me from the inside out? Thank you for dying on the cross. Thank you for forgiving me for my sin. Help me receive that forgiveness today. It's in your name we pray. Amen.